Okay, I think I was muted, so let's start again. Welcome to AFFIRM's September Virtual Speaker Series. I'm Bill Pratt, Government VP of Programs, and we extend our warmest welcome to you and appreciation for joining us today. Today's program, IT Modernization, the Spirit Behind FITARA in Government, will be showcasing several very distinguished government leaders. Kevin Walsh, the Director of Information Technology and Cybersecurity Team, U.S. Government Accountability Office, and David Shive, the Chief Information Officer of the U.S. General Services Administration. Our moderator, Nicole Johnson, the Managing Editor of GovLoop, will keep us going. I'd like to take a moment to share some insights about AFFIRM, the Association for Federal Information Resources Management. We're a nonprofit volunteer educational organization with the goal of improving the management of information through technology within the federal government. We've spanning over 40 years. In the spirit of AFFIRM's charter, we've raised and contributed well over $250,000 to date for high school and college scholarships. We'd like to thank our volunteers for their hard work to put programs together and continue to support the IT community, even in these interesting times. We extend our sincere thanks to our generous speaker series sponsors, SAIC, TrustWave, Fed Insider, ServiceNow, and Excel Technologies, as well as our sustaining partners shown in the slides. Their logos are included in acknowledgement of our appreciation for their support. Actually, at this point, I'd like to invite John Hosky from Fed Insider to say a couple of words. John?
Thanks, Bill, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me just start by thanking all of our speakers and our audience for being here. As Bill mentioned, I am John Hosky from Fed Insider, and as you can see, I did take this opportunity to dig a suit out of my closet. Over the past 13 years, we have grown Fed Insider to be the leading educational provider of events and online learning for the government community. Having over 100,000 subscribers nationally, heightened interest in our online forums has resulted in over 30,000 participants on our programs so far this year. For more information on our digital events and training forums, join us at fedinsider.com. And while you're on there, check out our podcast, Feds at the Edge. As appointed chair of AFFIRM's Communications Committee, serving as a volunteer member of the AFFIRM board and a sponsor of today's program, it's my pleasure to welcome everyone. I want to take this time to encourage you to give your time to our organization by supporting our committees and programs. Your involvement helps fund AFFIRM's STEM scholarships and grants. For more information on volunteering opportunities, send us an email at info@affirm.org. And with that, let me turn it back over to my friend and fellow board member, Bill Pratt.
Thank you, John, and thanks to Fed Insider for your continued support. AFFIRM will continue to hold an array of virtual programs, so please check the AFFIRM's website for upcoming events. Now over to Melissa Bruce, my program's co-chair, for a couple of quick housekeeping items. Melissa?
Hello, good afternoon. I have a few quick housekeeping items. If you have a question, simply open the Q&A tab on your webinar toolbar and type in your question. If you see another question you would like speakers to answer first, click the thumbs up button to upvote the question. If you're having technical difficulties, use the chat box in your toolbar to chat with the webinar host. We have also included a very brief survey at the end of the event to capture your feedback on our event and help us continuously improve. We appreciate if you could take a few seconds to participate. Back to you, Bill.
Thanks, Melissa. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's moderator, Nicole Johnson. Nicole's a longtime active participant in the AFFIRM events. Please join me in giving Nicole a warm AFFIRM welcome. Nicole?
Thank you so much. And I see the virtual claps. I feel very much welcomed. Welcome to my home. I'm so excited to be here. But thank you for the warm introduction and good afternoon to everyone. Good morning if you're on the West Coast. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. So the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act, which is a mouthful, I'm so glad that we endearingly call it FITARA, it has been the driving force for modernizing the way government gets work done. As a testament to the progress agencies have made, recently unveiled scorecards have steadily improved, which is great, even in the face of radically shifting changes, including government agencies going to telework. So we know modernization of IT, it underpins everything, right? The delivery of critical services, it improves government's knowledge and decision-making and ensures effective collaboration, which we are able to do here. Thank goodness for that. And so today what we want to do is really take a deep dive into how the FITARA scorecards have helped to drive technology modernization to really keep the conversation going. And as we were talking about on our prep call, bipartisan conversation going and movement forward, which is good. So specifically, we'll talk about FITARA's recent scorecard and how that has kept IT modernization at the forefront, as well as next steps in FITARA's approach in future directions for updates. And so as mentioned earlier, we want this to be conversational, so make sure to put your questions, comments, jokes in early and often so we can get to those, and I will do my best to get to as many as I can. So I just want to give a special thank you to AFFIRM for having me and to David and Kevin for sharing their expertise. So I figured to kick things off, we will start with the one agency that did get an A+ on the FITARA scorecard. Shout out to GSA. So David, my first question is really for you. If you can give us some insight into how you're viewing and talking about FITARA internally, because we know that it's a lot different than how the scorecard is discussed on the Hill or even outside of government agencies. So I'd love to get your thoughts and perspectives on that.
Yeah, so internally, that's a really good perspective. Thanks for asking the question. Internally, it's changed over time. When it first came out, we were like every agency saying, oh, what is this thing? And we're going to be monitored and managed by a new set of criteria to go on top of all the other criteria. But we found out relatively quickly and over time that FITARA was a pretty decent measure of how an agency is doing. And in the same way that federal IT was shifting and changing and morphing over its lifetime, we saw that the FITARA scorecard was doing the same thing. And so internally, we started to pay more and more attention to it. The way I directed my team was to say, let's not manage to the FITARA scorecard. Let's manage to good IT practice and let the chips fall where they may when it comes to the score. And that's been kind of a North Star the entire time as we've talked about it internally. We've increasingly tried to use better and better and more effective IT and management practices over time. But we do cast a wary eye over our shoulder to see what the impact is on the FITARA score. Is when the scores come out, we're just like everybody else. We're curious to see how our stakeholders are assessing how we're doing. And we watch to see if there's a disconnect between that scorecard and many of the more traditional measures, IT cost transparency, IT effectiveness, ability to increase velocity and increase quality of our deliveries over time. We make sure that those traditional IT measures that are changing and morphing and the FITARA scores don't deviate, because if they do deviate, we expect there's probably an area that we need to focus on.
No, that's great. And I'd love to follow up. So did you see any type of deviation? Because you're right. It's like there's FITARA, then there's MGT, and there's all these things, right, that scorecards and measuring. And so to say, all right, let's just not do the letter of the law. Let's do the spirit of the law and make sure that we're doing good IT practices. So I'd love to kind of get more insight onto that. If you found any deviations or what that looked like on your end.
So again, another really great question. So Kevin and the team over at GAO, working in partnership with the Hill, they did something that was really, really reassuring to see. So good practice in IT says that you deliver agilely, you invest incrementally, you drive transparency into what you're doing, and you strive to show business value, not technology value, but business value in every single thing that you do. I'll focus on those two first key parts, the agility and the incremental investment part. The FITARA measure for its first few iterations was very static. It was like, these are the good measures that should be employed to transparently show the state of federal IT. But when you have an agile way of delivering, meaning the way you deliver now is different than it was, 5 cycles ago or 10 cycles ago, and is expected to be different in the future. If the measures are static, the value of those measures diminish over time as good practice pivots out from under that. We were very, very pleased to see that GAO and the Hill was interested in being agile with the FITARA scorecard. And you've seen it change and shift and morph over time. That's the sign of a healthy oversight ecosystem that recognizes the best practice of delivery in a federal space, whether that's in spending or technology delivery or whatever. So yeah, we've seen it change and shift and morph, but that's representative of good IT and good IT measurement.
Awesome. And Kevin, I would love to bring you into this conversation. And I'm sure David said some things that you were nodding to and in agreement with. You got your shout out, which is anytime an auditor can get a shout out. I'm like, really? That is awesome. Raising the roof. That is awesome. But Kevin, we know that agencies have you on speed dial.
Yeah.
They're regularly in talks with you about what the Hill might be wanting and expecting from FITARA. So if you can give us your insight in terms of the types of conversations you're having with agencies. I'm sure David wasn't the only one who was excited to see the scorecard not being static, but I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago for unrelated matters, I went back and looked at what kind of changes there had been over the life of the scorecard. And David's right. Scorecard 1 and 2, they were static. They were the same thing. Starting in 3, they started making little tweaks, and in every scorecard from 3 all the way up to 10, there's been small changes and significant changes throughout. They've added areas, they've tweaked areas, they've gone from even altering the grading methodology of specific areas themselves. For example, it used to be there were always 5 A's, 5 B's, 5 C's, 5 D's, and 4 F's. And based on the progress agencies had made, they wanted to recognize that, so they increased the numbers of A's and B's. So the conversations, to your question, the conversations that I have with agencies kind of fall into a couple different buckets based on how long I've been chatting with them. If it's an infrequent speed dialer, the conversation is kind of, well, how does this work? What's going on? Why did we get the grade we did? The more frequent flyers, we talk through different methodologies that are in use, how they could be tweaked or shifted, and also ideas in terms of, well, have you guys thought about doing this, or why did you do it this way? And they get really more into the logic behind it and what the congressional staff were thinking when they selected the specific methodologies that they did. So those are some of the coolest questions. And even though you preface this by saying I'm an auditor, it's really an awesome way for me to get outside of the normal audit box. This is very atypical for GAO, and it is done entirely in support of the Hill. So this is not a GAO product. We always are very careful to say that this is the Hill scorecard, and it is, the committee's FITARA scorecard. But it is a very, very different and fun and interesting thing to participate in. So.
I love that. Fun, interesting. I see this is good all around. Sounds like everyone's excited about this, which I love. And to follow up on that, I love the infrequent callers and then the frequent flyers. What has been some of the most interesting, I guess, like feedback or questions or, things that they would like to see or do that you've heard, kind of feedback that you all might be taking into consideration or that you're looking into sharing with the Hill, or kind of what are you hearing from folks?
So you're talking about current things that could go, or over time?
Both. I don't want to miss out on anything good. So whatever you can share.
So historically, the most interesting questions are absolutely with the congressmen and women themselves. Getting to sit down in the room, talk to them about federal IT and the issues that we see, and in many cases, the grading methodologies that they choose is really, really cool. It really gets to the heart of just how interested they are. And over the life of this effort, we've gone through multiple administrations. The House itself has flipped, so we've had different chairmen. We used to have 2 subcommittees, now we're down to 1. But the interest and the members themselves are so awesome to have worked with over time, and it's entirely due to their efforts that the scorecard is where it is. So so that's kind of the chief amongst the most interesting conversations I have. In terms of discussions with agencies, I really like digging into not necessarily how the scorecard works, but why it was selected and the behaviors that Congress is trying to incentivize, and also freely acknowledge that the scorecard is not perfect and the potential problems and how to avoid or tweak the methodology uh, to kind of address that as best as we can. One of the earliest examples of that would be the Cio Authorities and CIO risk ratings metric, which God is not my favorite metric. In federal IT, having anything red or yellow is kind of the antithesis of good management. But for a really long time, Congress and the members and staff were seeing agencies say everything's green, look elsewhere, which is what it boiled down to. So they needed to come up with a way to incentivize agencies giving reds and yellows, which is very, very counterintuitive. But if you take apart what the risk rating is supposed to be, it's not a snapshot of where that given investment is now. It is essentially the CIO's opinion on the future of that investment. So if the CIO is worried or concerned about that, or even if it's just a critical or super expensive program, or conversely, you could have $100,000 modernization of a network hub in headquarters, and if it fails, then you're in deep trouble. So that might be a reason to change the rating there. So to attempt to avoid some degree of gaming, initial proposals debated between whether to reward CIOs based on the proportion of investments versus the proportion of dollars. The Hill decided to go with the dollar value one instead of the investment one because hypothetically agencies could spin up some investments and just red up those newly created meaningless investments. So by attaching it to the dollars, that was one way in which there was an interesting discussion on how to tweak and avoid potential gaming. Now, that's not to say there's no gaming in the scorecard, but that's an example.
And so were you saying that, we're talking about the risk metric for the CIO authority, was that another one that you were saying you weren't too fond of, or?
So you're getting me to spill the beans on my favorites and least favorites. The one that I also don't like the methodology of is the MGT Act grading. In particular because it requires the Hill staff themselves to send out oversight letters, which requires a lot of effort on their part. The agencies then have to draft letters, send them up to all the various layers of red tape to get them reviewed and approved, and send them back to the Hill, and then they have to be digested. And a lot of times those letters come to agencies fairly late, so it turns into a last-minute scramble. I also, that said, I have yet to come off with a different or better alternative. So there are several instances on the scorecard where it's not perfect, but it's what we got with the data we've got.
Right. No, and that's fair. David, I'd love to get your take on some of these things. I mean, you are your CIO authority, all of these, they're directly impacting you. So do you share similar feelings on maybe some of the scorecard metrics that you're like, or I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so, there is a vigorous and healthy debate amongst the CIOs and with GAO about the right way to measure. And while it's easy to pick apart some of the existing measures, I think the most important thing to key in on, Nicole, is that the measures have not remained static, that the partnership, and there's a partnership that exists between oversight and the legislative branch and the executive branch and oversight bodies like GAO. There's this partnership where we're all looking to increase transparency to our ultimate stakeholders, who are the citizens that we're all serving. And we can demonstrate as a partnership community that we've been able to do that increasingly well over time. And I expect that that's going to continue for the foreseeable future, as long as there is something like the FITARA scorecard around. So, I share some of Kevin's issues with kind of those MGT response things. Yeah, it creates a big flail there at the end that maybe is not the most productive thing, But in the absence of alternate or competing measure, it's better than nothing in that regard. But the team has shown and has been able to demonstrate over a pretty extensive period of time that, you know, something being better than nothing is not the end all. We'll continue to take a look at measures that are existent out maybe in the commercial world or other places to say, where are those good candidates to infuse into the portfolio represented in Fattara, so that the end game, better transparency, so the citizens of the United States can feel comfortable and confident with the investments we're making in IT in support of the complex business mission of government, that is happening. And we can absolutely say that now better than we could at Scorecard 5 and better than we could at Scorecard 1. And we'll continue to iterate as a community to better in that regard.
I'd also like to throw in one of my favorite quotes from Chairman Connolly, who notes that the scorecard is not intended to be a scarlet letter. It is purely intended to start the conversation. And in that regard, the scorecard itself has been a dramatic success. There are many agencies, OCIO shops who've told me that because of the scorecard, they are talking to components that previously wouldn't, hold the door open for them, that they are able to get into the room and be at the table with a voice that they did not have previously.
A tool and an effective tool at that. No, so I think that's definitely the message that we're getting from this conversation we're having. It's not to say, oh no, this grading's not right, this is not right, but to have a healthy conversation about, all right, well, what's working well, where do we see things moving? And so I'm really glad we started talking about that, because I know, David, TBM, or technology business management, you have certainly been a leader in this space. We know agencies and their partners will be required to be using this to better show and share metrics around IT. And so if you can maybe talk to that intersection of maybe a TBM and Fattara, and if there are data points and things you're able to gather that can tell you things maybe even beyond the scorecard, or to help you in ways that other agencies could benefit from if they were to do the same. So I'd love to kind of hear about that intersection and how that's working for you.
Yeah, the intersection is actually very blunt and very obvious when you kind of lift the lid and look under the covers for both of them. They're all about increased transparency. Whether it's transparency in how an IT shop is delivering against the business mission of the agency it's serving, or IT cost transparency, where you're assessing the value of IT investments relative to the business value derived out of those investments. It's all about increasing transparency so that executive decision makers can make better decisions. On the Fattara scorecard, if your scores are low, or the traditional IT measures that feed into the Fattara scorecard, if they are low, it lets you know that you have some areas that you need to work on. You need to increase your cybersecurity posture and stance. You need to increase the value of the reporting from CIO up to the front office of an agency, or you need to increase the value of your CPIC numbers or whatever. In the TBM transparency side, it's a good thing for an executive decision maker, a CIO, to be able to say, I've made an investment in this thing, this software, this hardware, this contractor, and be able to demonstrate in business terms, in business value, what the outcome is. In GSA, using cost transparency has allowed us to make a very clear distinction about our IT investments. If we're not able to show that business value in some investment in people, in time, in funds, if we're not able to show some business value in there, we've started to ask ourselves, why are we going to do this thing? And it's helped us get away from doing IT for the sake of IT, and instead saying we're a support entity designed solely to support the business mission of our agency. GSA, we have a pretty broad business mission portfolio, but it allows us to say these are the lower value investments or lower value business outcomes that we're getting, and there's a whole portfolio of larger values. So we're going to pivot those investment dollars over into those high value areas. And now that we've been doing it for a while, we've been doing TBM for 5 or 6 years now. we're able to then use it as a decision engine to say, these are the type of investments that have yielded good business outcomes in the past. Therefore, we're going to reduce our portfolio of the things that we're looking at in the future and focus that time and attention on the highest value outcomes. And the things that have been just to, get faster spinning drives or prettier blinking lights or whatever, but we're not able to show any business value, we're going to stop investment in those areas unless there's some compelling reason to do so.
And a quick follow-up there, I'm really glad that you are mentioning how this is helping you to make better business decisions, because that, right, at the end of the day, like that's what we're doing. And especially in these times, these interesting times that we're all in, is there an example you can share, because you all had invested in TBM and had a good view of your portfolio and what was working and not working? Can you share an example of maybe of how you use that insight to make a decision? I know you all are high on telework, but if there's anything that comes to mind that help you make a decision that you can share.
Yeah, so I have a very specific example. It's no mystery that our FITARA scores are pretty high, and that we've been able to demonstrate over in a pretty extended period of time that we're doing good IT on behalf of the businesses of GSA. And we're deeply proud of that. At the same time, these interesting times that we live in, we've had a very flat budget over the last 5 or 6 years. Yet our costs, internal costs, have gone up. Our PC&B, our personnel costs, have gone up because, thanks to our partners on the Hill and the White House, we've been able to give raises to our employees for successive years. So our personnel costs have gone up. Inflation has meant our costs for goods and services have gone up. The way contracting happens in the federal government, there's contract escalation clauses in our contracts. So all of these costs have been going up, yet we've been able to flatline our budget for 5 years running. So, and our scores are really good. Our customer experience scores are 89 to 91%. Our NPS scores are in the low to mid 70s. I mean, these are like Apple and Tesla numbers. So we've been able to demonstrate a good job, yet I know that the future likely means that I'm not going to get a raise, that the budget of GSA IT is likely to stay the same. If we have to pay back some of the bills that we've been incurring over the last 6 months during the national emergency, my budget may go down because I have this intersection of increased costs and I suspect that my income is likely going to stay the same or go down. I'm having to look at new ways to deliver IT. Even though the way I've delivered IT over the last 5 years, I've been able to demonstrate that we're doing a good job. That's a risky thing for a CIO. If you have something that's not broken, you want to fix it. But I've been able to assess through TBM that it is likely that I cannot continue to deliver at the same level, at the same investment level, because I have these increasing pressures on PC&B, on cost of goods and services, on contract escalations. All that visibility has come because of TBM. So it's meant that in my strategic planning, we're having to dramatically dramatically pivot in how we're expecting to deliver IT over the next 3 to 5 years. And that means driving in digital services deeper into the organization. It means using data very differently in our organization. It means increasing the use of self-help and leveraging the really smart knowledge workers who have some working understanding of IT technology into supporting my enterprise platform stuff. So these are all things that we're thinking of and strategic pivots that we're making in response to that increased transparency that TBM has given us.
That's awesome. Very proactive, as opposed to, oh my gosh, this is happening, what do I do? But you're able to methodically think through. So no, that's awesome. We have some good questions rolling in. I will use moderator's privilege to ask a follow-up for Kevin and then get to these fantastic questions that you all have submitted. But, just listening to David share how he's using data and metrics to tell the story about what they will be able to do going forward. I know just from interactions I've seen and GSA events I've attended, the relationship between the administrator and the CIO, and she understands the value of IT, seems very strong, as opposed to maybe some CIOs that are in a different spot where maybe they're not reporting up directly or whatever the case might be. We know that's reflected in the scorecard. So I guess, Kevin, for cyber, we know that was a tough one for agencies according to the scorecard. We know MGT, I'm imagining maybe that's with the Working Capital Fund, and also Cio Authority reporting directly. So I guess if there are any thoughts or insights you can share on how we should be, I guess, interpreting or what's the takeaway from those scores, and maybe those who have you on speed dial, what their plans are for addressing those or kind of following up on those issues.
So MGT, I'll address in a second. Cybersecurity is almost the scorecard itself encapsulated. In the same way that the scorecard keeps on growing because the job is never done, cybersecurity is never done. So it is going to keep being a challenge, as long as they're the good guys and the bad guys trying to, protect or get the data respectively. That's going to be something that agencies need to work on. What I like and don't like about the current cybersecurity score is that it strengthens the IGs. The FISMA score is broken into two pieces. First is based on the input from the IGs, and the second part is based on OMB's annual cap goals. So I do like that the scoring, kind of bolsters the work that IGs are doing, and really encourages the OCIO shops to work hand in hand with those IGs to make sure that they're addressing their issues in a timely manner, and that when they come back the next year, hopefully they can demonstrate progress. I don't like that the IG's assessments are only annual. We do have a biannual scorecard, so that piece of the scorecard always stays fixed for the off cycle. The flip side of that, of course, is the scores from performance.gov, which are the cap goals that OMB sets related to IT modernization and cybersecurity. Those are updated on a quarterly basis, so they're much more frequent, but they don't have the broad, all-encompassing reach that the IG's assessments do. So neither of those are perfect data sets, but especially when it comes to cybersecurity, there's a huge amount of sensitivity, rightfully so, about what the government puts out there in the public domain. And the Hill, whenever deliberating, could we add a third leg rather than having two legs to stand on? Could we make it a tripod or something? There's no good already available public data set that that could be used as much as we want it. So when talking to agencies about how they could improve in the FISMA scores, it's going to take time. It's not something that you flick a switch and suddenly our cybersecurity is better. That's not how cybersecurity works. So it's going to take time. It's going to take effort working with the IGs. Also, every year when OMB resets the baseline on what the goals are for the next year, I'd expect to see some backsliding in those aspects. But agencies cybersecurity needs to be a focus for agencies. They are coming along. They're showing improvement, but there's still a long way to go. So MGT, the problem with MGT is that it, in some cases, requires congressional action. The MGT law itself it's not clear that it gave agencies the authority to transfer appropriations to a working capital fund if agencies were to establish one. So in the absence of that, there are some agencies that have done workarounds, or in SBA's case, they have worked with their appropriators to get that specific transfer authority to allow them to move funds into their MGT specific working capital fund. But that's a hard lift. In the same way that the CIO reporting directly to the agency head, that's something that the CIOs themselves really, if they're going to expend the political capital to do that, a lot of the CIOs will say, well, we'd rather use the political capital to do something else. And if the agency head decides to change the reporting structure, then so be it. So.
And that's that. Sticking to it. I didn't compliment your background, by the way. Very nice, very calming.
Thank you. You too could go to the Amalfi Coast.
Wouldn't we all love to? All right, great questions have come in. Thank you all. I see some in the chat in the Q&A, so we will get through as many as we can. So this question, I guess following up, Kevin, on this conversation we're having, what changes do you see in FITARA's scorecard for the next year?
It's always fun looking into the crystal ball. One of the things that, David was just talking about TVM. OMB is beginning to put information on TBM on the dashboard. You have to go to the data feeds to find most of it, but the potential there for the scorecard is immense. I would love to, at some point, not maybe the next scorecard, but some point down the line, I can see TBM being used to refine the existing scorecard measures. You know, you can, if you think through the, not necessarily the highest level that is currently available, but the next level down of information in the cost pools and the IT towers that are available, you could really get into, you know, what kind of managed, or how much agencies are spending on managed services, what kind of, you know, what they're spending on maintenance and support. There's a lot of really neat things that you could do once those data are available. So that's kind of the far future. Near term, you know, the Hill always loves to do minor improvements or refinements. I would love to see slight tweaks, perhaps to data centers. Right now, agencies set annual goals, and at the halfway point, they're being judged against an annual goal when they're only 6 months into the cycle. So maybe kind of try to prorate that kind of thing. It's also going to be very interesting to see how the Hill decides to handle EIS, whether they continue the preview or whether they roll it in right away. There has to be some sort of mechanism by which they change the percentages that they displayed in Scorecard 10 into letter grades. Now it wouldn't be fair to use, well, I don't think, my personal opinion, not necessarily the Hills, I don't think it would be fair to use the percentages towards meeting the deadline when the networks contract and all the associated GWACs are to be shut off in a few years. So there has to be some way to say, okay, where do we expect agencies to be at this point, and hold them against that. I also hope, and maybe David can share some inside baseball, that even the addition of EIS and agencies transition off networks to the scorecard has increased the amount of attention agencies are paying to it, and hopefully that program office has had their phones lighting up a little bit more than before.
David, did you want to share insider baseball, or should we take the smile as agreement?
It's been a good thing for GSA and ultimately a good thing for the federal computing enterprise to find any number of accelerators or accelerants for EIS.
Well, awesome. Well, you have a lot of fans of the two of you in the chat. People want to know that you're doing safe and healthy during the pandemic. So this is great. Your fans are reporting in. So question, I'll start with you, David, and then go to Kevin. How have you ensured that your employees are adapting to and benefiting from the value that data-driven business decisions brings to the agencies and to OMB for more effective and efficient governance?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. And frankly, it's an area that gets overlooked a little bit sometimes. You know, we have an obligation as executives in the federal government to produce good value in our business mission on behalf of the citizens that we're serving. But we also have an obligation to be good stewards of the people that we manage and the internal resources that we use. And so I love the question, you know, what's the impact on people? So in GSA, we made a concerted effort about 4 or 5 years ago to treat the data of GSA as a singular asset, regardless of business domain who owns it, whether it's financial data or HR data or acquisition data or public building data or whatever. We said we're gonna act on that as a singular asset, and we thought that we could learn some things, and lo and behold, we did. And so one of the ways it's impacted our people is they are better able to deliver services to the agencies that we serve and the downstream to the citizens that we serve. For example, it's eminently valuable to be able to mash up public building data and acquisition data. You can know some things about the spending trends on, you know, we're the biggest landlord in the world, on spending trends on how we do that and how effectively we do that. Being able to mash those data together allowed us to do that. And it makes us, our people, more effective. Internal to my shop, using data as a decision driver, as a decision engine, has allowed me to conform to FITARA smartly. So we conformed to FITARA really before FITARA was a thing. We became a fully consolidated organization with one CIO, went from 27 CIOs down to one. We had a singular view into IT spend across the entire agency, where I either had direct or indirect, but manageable control over IT spend across the entire agency. We started to ferret out duplication in the agency so we could buy once, use many, which is always smart things. We drove in simplified IT by consolidating data centers and rationalizing application. All this is really, really good work. I had people whispering in my ear saying, doing all of this consolidation work, this rationalization work, you're going to alienate your people. And I said, well, you know, the data doesn't suggest that. What the data shows is that people who can draw a straight line between the tough work that they do, even if that work is swapping out tapes in a data center or something, if they can draw a straight line between the work they do and the mission of the organization they work for, this is commercial or public sector, that they become increasingly happy in their work. They become increasingly confident in their work. And that's all really good stuff. So we step back a few years into this and say, okay, was our theory proved out? And it absolutely was. Starting 3 years ago, GSA IT was the highest rated medium and large size IT shop according to EVS scores in the federal government. Same thing 2 years ago. And then last year, for the very first time, we're the highest rated IT shop, full stop, small, medium, or large. Our employees love working here, even though we were doing the things that many said are going to drive employees away. They're going to make them disenfranchised with what they do. We're able to say, no, the data says something else. Our employees love working at GSA. And it's directly because of all of this really high value, important work that we do.
That's awesome. If anyone's looking for a job change, it sounds like GSA IT shop is the place to be. So, oh no, that's great. And I think that speaks a lot to your leadership, obviously, as well, and in the way the team works together. So Kevin, was there anything you wanted to add from your team, your perspective?
So I, as an auditor, hold a different role and a different position than David does. However, GAO, as the auditors for the government, I mean, one of the prime things we do is make sure that others are being efficient and effective, responsible stewards of the taxpayer dollar. And so all of the audits that we do, hopefully, you know, are attempting to make sure that the government is adhering to best practices, whether that be, you know, NIST or somewhere in the government, or OMB guidance or legislation. So much of what we do is attempting to make sure that the business decisions that agencies are making are being, you know, reasonable, data-driven, and are going to make the government more efficient and effective. So I think that's core to what GAO is and the auditors that we have.
Awesome. Moving right along through these questions. So this is for you, David. You'd mentioned agility in your opening remarks. So recent changes have complicated agency reporting on the use of incremental development at the investment level. It would be interesting to hear how GSA and GAO, so it sounds like we're bringing you back in, Kevin, are dealing with that change.
Yeah.
Thanks. That was at the end.
So I think this goes back to one of my very first comments when we started this discussion. There may be changes in how, you know, oversight or the White House or other organizations kind of look and view how we deliver, you know, agilely, invest incrementally, stuff like that. All of that's fine. People are going to have their opinions on how they view effective IT is delivered against the business mission of an agency. Ultimately, though, the CIO has the ultimate responsibility to be able to properly assess and then manage according to those assessments. So, well, yeah, there may be some challenges on how people are viewing how we, what we should be measuring and how we should deliver. Ultimately, it's my job as CIO to deliver as I see best. And then people can vote me off the island if I'm not doing a good job. So, you know, while the measurement portfolio may change over time, as a CIO, I have primary obligation, primary responsibility to manage as best I as I see fit, and to use whatever measures will help me, give me the transparency to measure effectively. So yeah, those measures may change, and some of them may be more problematic than others. I still have the obligation to measure as I see fit and drive delivery accordingly. So I really don't see there's going to be much change in how we deliver, and we'll continue to find new and effective ways to measure agility, incremental investment, velocity increases, quality of output of our product, software and hardware product and stuff like that. And we'll make decisions based on that.
So I'm looking at the question and thinking it through, and for the FITARA scorecard, which I'm going to loop this back around to, I think one of the potential angles of this question is how exactly the changes that were made to agencies' reporting requirements impacted the scorecard. And that's kind of central to the scorecard and the efforts to keep it changing and keep it updated. Last reporting cycle, OMB changed which fields are required, but at its heart, the scorecard is measuring what CIOs are doing to implement the incremental authorities that were given to them. CIOs are supposed to certify for their IT whether each thing is delivering functionality in an incremental manner. So whether that be at the investment level or at the next levels down, the Hill wants to measure it. And so if the data changes, they're just going to find a different way to measure it as best they can. So this is an example of what we've been talking about all along, about how the scorecard continues to evolve. If the underlying data change, it'll evolve and change again. I anticipate plenty of future changes. It's OMB's prerogative to change what data they collect and also what data they put up publicly. So as those data change, then the scorecard will change and grow with it. So I think that's a good thing.
Nice. I want to ask a quick question on, speaking of the scorecard too, looked like the software management and inventory was a bright spot in the scorecard. It's not obviously the topic that makes headlines, but it makes a lot of sense. So I didn't know if there are any thoughts around there, what you're seeing, and how, an example of how it moves beyond just meeting the requirements, but actually like there's long-term benefits and saving money.
Yeah, the software licensing area is an area that I would love to see grow and evolve, because it is currently, well, if you look at the bottom of that column, it does say to be sunset. So at some point, I assume the easy A will go away for many of these agencies. In this most recent iteration, 23 of the 24 agencies got an A. The sole remaining agency, OPM, was there testifying, and their CIO assured Congress that something was getting done, and they were going to have a comprehensive, regularly updated software license inventory that would be used to make management decisions, which is basically the tiered steps you need to get to an A. The problem with changing the grading on that is we don't have great data that we could use to grade something further. Right now, it is based on Gio's recommendation follow-up. So an old report we made in 2014, Gio 14-413, made the recommendations that we're tracking and using to do these grades. Once agencies close those recommendations, though, we're not going back to agencies and saying, hey, we're triple checking. Are you still doing this thing that you told us you were doing over the past few years? So in the future, TBM holds some promise, perhaps, for getting a gauge of how much agencies are spending on software. So that's one possibility. Gio could also do another audit, sorry, David, on agencies' use of software licensing. There are also, when you think about whether agencies are appropriately managing their software licenses, you'd think that there is, well, there absolutely is better data at the agency level. So there's also the possibility of something being made transparent. But yeah, it's a bright spot because agencies have, to their credit, put in, inventory management tools. The downside is it feels like it's, several years later than it should have been. I really wish agencies had, inventories of their software licenses, many years ago, so that they could have realized those savings earlier.
No more easy A's, taking it off. I think I can slip in one more question and maybe have some closing thoughts, but this question's for you, David. Putting on your CIO council hat for a second, I don't know if you ever take it off, but it's on. So what are some of the areas of FITARA that come up most often during the council meetings? Does the council have plans to focus on one or two of the FITARA scorecard areas that are giving agencies the most challenge?
Yeah, so good question. Yeah, the CIO Council Vice Chair hat never really comes off, but that's a good thing. You know, we had some of the same concerns that, you know, Kevin talked about in the beginning, you know, with CIO Authorities and MGT and stuff like that. The great thing is that there's been this great open line of communication between the CIO Council and with Kevin's shop. You know, we're not shy about talking about what we think are good measures, and Kevin and his team are not shy about picking up the phone and listening to us. So thank you for that. I appreciate that partnership. Yeah, and we expect that the council will continue to have their finger on the pulse of what we think are good measures that we get from academia, that we get from out in the commercial space, those measures that show, I think, the greatest business value, and try to drive those into kind of enterprise view of the way things are measured. We'll continue to keep that line of communication open. You know, a perfect example is, you know, do you measure the velocity in which agencies deliver IT in response to their business mission? How do you measure quality? What do quality measures look like? Because the federal government operates as a widely diversified conglomerated corporation. The business mission is so broad and varied. How do you say, you know, quality of software, hardware delivery is good in this agency and not good in this agency? Those are tough things to wrap our head around. But you know what? Some of the best and brightest minds in the federal CIO world, and the best and brightest minds in GAO, and best and brightest minds up on the Hill, they're interested in cracking those problems, solving those problems. So I think that we'll continue to look for kind of what those more modern measures are, those transparency-based measures and those quality and velocity-based measures, what those should be like, and find some elegant ways to drive them into that process. And even if for whatever reason GAO or the Hill doesn't adopt those, from the federal CIO perch, we'll be looking to drive those into agencies, because that's just how you measure good IT. That's what measurement of IT here in the 21st century looks like.
So you're the frequent flyer that Kevin was talking about. Go ahead, Kevin. I will give you the last words, as we have about a minute left.
I'd also really quick add that the scorecard is not for internal use. I mean, the tools and techniques that David has for him to manage his IT shop are orders of magnitude better than the scorecard. To I guess wrap up with Chairman Connolly's words again, the scorecard is intended to start a discussion. I sincerely hope that it is not what agencies use to manage internally. They have their own tools, but as long as the scorecard is driving that discussion and getting the CIOs the seat at the table, then it's succeeding.
Yeah.
Well, we have certainly got the conversation going here today. So I want to thank you both, David and Kevin, for the insights that you've shared. And attendees, you should have a post-event survey pop up on your screen. If you could please fill that out to share your feedback for future events. Thank you again. Please give our speakers a virtual round of applause. And with that, I will turn things back over to Bill.
Thank you, Nicole. As looking to start my video here, it's not working, so I'm just going to say hello via my voice. So thanks so much to Kevin and David. Here we go. So a little bit slow on the uptake here, but we got it going on. Thanks to Kevin and David. Of course, Nicole, you were terrific today. It was a really interesting discussion on a very timely topic. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today. We know how incredibly busy you all are. AFFIRM applauds your contributions and leadership through these unprecedented times. But really, really just a great fun conversation as well. So thanks so much. And folks, to you out there listening, thank you for joining us today. We encourage you all to take the time to complete the survey, and we hope you will join us next month. Well, we will be talking about another great topic. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.